Preface to Myths and Legends of the Mississippi Valley and the Great Lakes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. Myths and Legends of the Mississippi Valley and the Great Lakes by Catherine Berry Judson. Preface. Mystery, magic, and manitos abound in the land of Hiawatha, in the land of the Ojibwas, among the green islands, graceful and beautiful, lying amidst the dancing blue waters, when the sun shines over the Gitche Gumee, the great water. Manitos, great and mighty, lived in the cool depths of the mighty forests, in the rivers and lakes, and even in the snows of winter. And adventures there were, in those early days, amongst these islands of the north, when Manitos directed the affairs of men. Gitche Gumee is Lake Superior. But the animal fathers lived upon the earth before there came the two-legged walkers. There were many animals. There were many beavers. It was the beavers who made Gitche Gumee, the great water. They made it by building two dams. The first they built at the Grand Sault, and the second was 5 leagues below. When Great Hare came up the river, he said, "This must not be so." Therefore he stepped upon the first dam, but he was in haste. He did not break it down. Therefore there are now great falls and whirlpools at that place. But at the second dam, Great Hare stepped upon it mightily. Therefore there are now few falls, and only a little swirling water at that place. Great Hare was very mighty. When he chased beaver, he stepped across a bay 8 leagues wide. Around the Michilimackinac was the land of the Great Hare. There, amongst the green islets, under the cool shade of wide-spreading trees, where fish leaped above the rippling waters, he made the first fish net. He made it after watching Spider weave a web for catching flies. It was Winnie Bozo who, in Ojibwa land, discovered the wild rice and taught the Indians how to use it. He first pointed out the low grassy islands in the lakes, waving their bright green leaves and spikes of yellowish-green blossoms. He showed them how to cut paths through the wild rice beds before the grain was ripe, and later to beat it into their canoes. He told them always to gather the wild rice before a storm, else the wind would blow it all into the water. Therefore the Indians use wild rice in all their feasts. They even taught the white man to use it. Winnebago is only a variation of the name also given as Manabush. Both are identical with Hiawatha. When the snows of winter lay deep upon the forests of the north, when ice covered lakes and rivers, then the storytellers of the Ojibwas, as of all other Indian tribes, told the tales of the olden times, when Manitos lived upon the earth, and when the animal fathers roamed through the forest. But such stories are not told in summer. All the woods and shores, all the bays and islands are, in summer, the home of keen-hearing spirits, who like not to have Indians talking about them. But when the deep snows come, then the spirits are more drowsy. Then the Indians, when northwest rattles the flaps of the wigwams, and wild animals hide in the shelter of the deep forest, tell their tales. All winter they tell them, while the fires burn in the wigwams. Tell them until the frogs croak in the spring. Tales they tell of how Gitche Manito, the Great One, taught the Indians how to plant the Indian corn, how to strip and bury mondamin, and how to gather the corn in the month of falling leaves, that there may be food in the camps when the snows of winter come. Tales they tell of Gitche Manito, the Evil One, who brings only distress and sickness. Tales of the land of Hiawatha. Mystery and magic lay all about them. It is a far cry from the stories of the north along the banks of the Mississippi, from that land of long winters, through the country of the mound builders, to the sunnier Southland. Yet from north to south, around the glimmering Indian fires, grouped eager men and women and children, listening to the storytellers. But quite different are the tales of the Southland, of the Cherokees, Biloxis, and Chitimachas. They are stories of wild turkeys, of persimmons and raccoons, and of the spirits which dwell in the mountain places where none dare go. Stories also are they of Brer Rabbit and the Tar Wolf, which came from Indian slaves working in the fields in early days, through the negro slaves working beside them, to the children of the white men. It is a loss to American literature that so much of the legendary history of these Indian tribes has gone, beyond hope of recovery. Exquisite in color, poetical in feeling, these legends of sun, moon, and stars, of snow, ice, lightning, thunders, the winds, the life of the forest birds and animals about them, and the longing to understand the why and the how of life, all which we have only in fragments. Longfellow's work shows the wonderful beauty of these northern legends, nor has he done violence to any of them in making them poetical. His picture of the departure of Hiawatha, the lone figure standing stately and solemn as the canoe drifted out towards the glowing sunset, while from the shore, in the shadow of the forest, came the low Indian chant, mingling with the sighings of the pine trees, is truly Indian. For the mystical and poetical is strong in the Indian nature. As in all the other volumes of this series, no effort has been made to ornament or amplify these legends, in the effort to make them literary or give them literary charm. They must speak for themselves. What editing has been done has been in simplifying them, and freeing them from the verbose settings in which many were found. For in this section of the country, settled before it was realized that there was an Indian literature, the original work of noting down the myths was very imperfectly done. Thanks are due to the work of Albert E. Jenks on the wild rice Indians of the Upper Lakes, to James Mooney for the myths of the Cherokees, to George Catlin for some of the Upper Mississippi legends, to the well-known but almost inaccessible work of Schoolcraft, and to others. K. B. J. End of Preface. Part 1 of Myths and Legends of the Mississippi Valley and the Great Lakes by Catherine Berry Judson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Earthmaker, Winnebago. When Earthmaker came to consciousness, he thought of the substance upon which he was sitting. He saw nothing. There was nothing anywhere. Therefore his tears flowed. He wept. But not long did he think of it. He took some of the substance upon which he was sitting, so he made a little piece of earth for our fathers. He cast this down from the high place on which he sat. Then he looked at what he had made. It had become something like our earth. Nothing grew upon it. Bare it was, but not quiet. It kept turning. "How shall I make it become quiet?" thought Earthmaker. Then he took some grass from the substance he was sitting upon and cast it down upon the earth. Yet it was not quiet. Then he made a man. When he had finished him, he called him Tortoise. At the end of all his thinking, after he came to consciousness, he made the two-legged walkers. Then Earthmaker said to this man, "The evil spirits are abroad to destroy all I have just created. Tortoise, I shall send you to bring order into the world." Then Earthmaker gave him a knife. But when Tortoise came to earth, he began to make war. He did not look after Earthmaker's creation. So Earthmaker took him back. Then he sent Hare down to earth to restore order. He said, "See, grandmother, I have done the work my father directed me to do. The lives of my uncles and aunts, the two-legged walkers, will be endless like mine." His grandmother said, "Grandson, how could you make the lives of your uncles and aunts endless like yours? How could you do something in a way Earthmaker had not intended it to be? Earthmaker could not make them thus." Hare thought, "My grandmother must be related to some of the evil spirits I have killed. She does not like what I have done, for she is saying that I killed the evil spirits." Now grandmother heard him think. "No, grandson, I am not thinking of that. I am saying that our father made death so there would not be a lack of food on earth. He made death to prevent overcrowding. He also made a spirit world in which they would live after death." Hare did not like what she said. "Grandmother surely does not like it," he thought. "She must be related to the evil spirits." "No, grandson, it is not so. But to quiet you, your uncle and aunts will live to be very old." Then she spoke again. "Now, grandson, stand up. The two-legged walkers shall follow me always. I shall follow you always. Therefore try to do what I tell you. Remember, you are a man. Do not look back after you have started." Then they started to go around the earth. "Do not look back," she said. "I wonder why she says that," thought Hare. Then he turned his head the least little bit to the left, and looked back to the place from which they had started. Instantly everything caved in. "Oh, my! Oh, my!" exclaimed Grandmother. "Grandson, a man you are, but I thought you were a great man, so I greatly encouraged you. Now, even if I wished to, I could not prevent death." This she meant, so they say. Then they went around the earth to the edge of the fire which encircles the earth. That way they went, so they say. Creation, Chitimacha. There was a creator of all things. This great mystery understood all things. He had no eyes, yet he could see. He had no ears, yet he could hear. He had a body, but it could not be seen. When the earth was first made, the creator of all things placed it under the water. The fish were first created, but when the creator wanted to make men, there was no dry land. Therefore crawfish was sent down to bring up a little earth. He brought up mud in his claws. Immediately it spread out, and the earth appeared above the waters. Then the great mystery made men. He made the Chitimachas. It was at Natchez that he first made them. He gave them laws, but the people did not follow the laws. Therefore many troubles came, so that the Creator could not rest. Therefore the Creator made tobacco. Then men could become quiet and rest. Afterwards he made women, but at first they were like wood. So he directed a chief to teach them how to move, and how to cook, and to sew skins. Now when the animals met the Chitimachas, they ridiculed them. For these men had no fur, and no wool, and no feathers to protect them from storms, or rain, or the hot sun. The Chitimachas were sad because of this. Then the Creator gave them bows and arrows, and taught them how these things should be used. He told them that the flesh of the animals was good for food, and their skins for covering. Thus the animals were punished. The Creator taught them also how to draw fire from two pieces of wood, one flat and the other pointed. Thus they learned to cook their food. The Creator taught them also to honor the bones of their relatives, and so long as they lived, to bring them food. Now in those days the animals took part in the councils of men. They gave advice to men, being wiser. Each animal took a special care of the Chitimachas. Therefore the Indians respect the animals which gave good advice to their ancestors, and this aids them even today in time of need. The Creator also made the moon and the stars. Both were to give life and light to all things on earth. Moon forgot the sacred bathing, therefore he is pale and weak, giving but little light to man. But Sun gives light to all things. Sun often stops on her trail to give more time to the Indians when they are hunting or fighting their enemies. Moon does not, but always pursues his wife over the sky trail. Yet he can never catch up with her. The mounds in the Chitimacha country are the camping places of the spirit sent down by the Creator to visit the Indians. This spirit taught the men how to cook their food and to cure their wounds. He is still highly honored. The Creation, Wyandot. There was in olden days something the matter with the earth. It has changed. We think so. We think the great mystery made it, and made men also. He made them at a place called mountains. It was eastward. When he had made the earth and these mountains, he covered the earth over with something. He did it with his hands. Under this he put men. All the different tribes were there. One of the young men climbed up and found his way to the surface. It was very beautiful. Then a deer ran past with an arrow in its side. He followed it to where it fell and died. He looked back to see its tracks, and he soon saw other tracks. They were the footprints of the person who shot the deer. He soon came up. It was the Maker of Men. Thus he taught the Indians what they must do when they came out of the earth. The Creator showed the Indian how to skin the deer and prepare it for food, and how to use the skin for dress. When everything was ready, he said, "Make a fire." The Indian said, "I do not know how." Therefore the Creator made the fire. Then he said, "Put the meat on the fire, roast it." The Indian did this, but he did not turn the stick. Therefore it was burned on one side and not roasted on the other. So the Creator showed him how to turn the stick. Then the Great Mystery called all the Indians up out of the earth. They came out by tribes. To each tribe he gave a chief. Then he made a head chief over all the tribes who should teach them what they should do. The Great Mystery also made good and evil. They were brothers. One made pleasant things grow. The other spent all his time spoiling his brother's work. He made stony places and rocks, and made bad fruits to grow. He made great trouble among men. He annoyed them very much. Good had to go back and do his work over again. It kept him very busy. Then Good decided to destroy evil. Therefore Good proposed to run a race with evil. When they met, Good said, "Tell me first, what do you most fear?" "Buck's horns," said Evil. "What do you most fear?" "Indian grass braided," said Good. Then Evil at once went to his grandmother, who braided Indian grass. He got a great deal of it. He put the grass in the trail and put it in the limbs of the trees along the trail where Good was to run. Good also filled the path, where his brother Evil was to run, with buck's horns. They said, "Who shall run first?" They argued about it. At last Good said, "Well, I will, because I proposed the race." So he started off, and Evil followed him. When Good became tired, he pulled down a strand of braided green grass and chewed it. Thus he ran rapidly. But Evil became tired. Yet Good would not stop until he reached the end of the trail. The next day Evil started on his trail. Everywhere he was stopped by the branches of buck's horns. They greatly annoyed him. He said to Good, "Let me stop." Good said, "No, you must go on." At last, towards evening, Evil fell in the trail. At once Good took buck's horns and killed him. Then Good returned to his grandmother. She was very angry. She loved Evil. That night Good was awakened by a sound. The spirit of Evil was talking with his grandmother. Then, when Evil knew Good was awake, he said, "Let me into the wigwam." But Good always said no. At last Evil said, "I go to the northwest land. You will never see me more. Those who follow me will never come back. Death will keep them." Creation of the Races, Biloxi. Footnote: obviously influenced by missionary teaching, but a most curious myth. End footnote. Chitimacha, the one above, made people. He made one person, an Indian. While the Indian was sleeping, he made a woman. Then the one above went away to find food for the man and the woman. After he left, something was standing there upright. It was a tree. A person said, "Why do you not eat the fruit of this tree? I think he made it for you to eat." So the woman pulled off some fruit and stewed it, and she and the Indian ate it. Shortly after, the one above returned. Now he had gone away to find food for them. When he found they had stewed this fruit, he was very angry. He said, "Work for yourself. Find your own food, else you shall be hungry." When the one above had been a long time gone, he sent back a letter to the Indians, but the Indians did not receive it, because the Americans took it. That is why Americans know how to read and write. Now, after the letter came, the people found a very clear stream of water. The American found it first and lay down in it. Therefore he is very white all over. Next came the Frenchmen, but the water was not so clear. Then came the Indians. Therefore Indians are not of light complexion, because they did not find the water when it was clear. Afterwards came the Spaniard, and he was not white, because the water had become very muddy. Some time after, the negro was made. The one above thought he should attend to work, so he made the negro's nose flat. And by this time the water was very muddy, and the stream was very low. So the negro washed only the palms of his hands. Therefore negroes are very black, except on the palms of their hands. Story of the Creation, Ojibwa. When Chitimacha, the Great Mystery, created the earth plane, it was bare, without trees or shrubs. Then he created 2 Indians, a man and a woman. Now when there were 10 persons on the earth plane, death happened. The first man lamented and went back and forth over the plain, complaining. He said, "Why did the good spirit send death so soon?" The Good Mystery heard this. He called a great council. He said, "Man is not happy. I have made him very frail. Therefore death happens. What shall we do?" The council lasted 6 days, and there was not a breath of air to disturb the waters. The 7th was the Nagitsik, the excellent day. The sky was blue, and there were no clouds. On that day Chitimacha sent down a messenger to earth. In his right hand was a piece of white hare's skin, and in the left the head of a white-headed eagle. On each was the blue stripe of peace. The messenger said, "Chitimacha sent me. He has heard your words. You must obey his commands." Then he gave to the Indians the hare's skin, the eagle's head, and a white otter skin with the blue stripe of peace. Thus Chitimacha taught the Indians how to make magic and how to be strong. Creation, a fragment, Ojibwa. Long ago Nokomis came down from Skyland, but remained fluttering in mid-air. There was no place on which to rest her foot. The fishes at once held a great council. Now Tortoise had a shell-covered back, very broad. After the council he rose to the surface so that Nokomis might rest upon his back. Then the drift masses of the sea gathered about the tortoise. Thus the land was made. Then Nokomis found herself alone on the land, so she married a Manito from the Skyland. 2 sons had Nokomis, twin brothers, but the brothers were not friends. One was a good huntsman, the other could kill no game at all, so they disputed. Then one brother rose to the Skyland. He caused the thunders to roar over his brother's head. Now the sister of these twin brothers was the ancestor of the Ojibwas. Creation of the Mandans. Mandan. The Mandans were the people of the pheasants. They were the first people in the world. At first they lived in the earth. Now in the dark earthland they had many vines. Then at last one vine grew up through a hole in the earth plane, far above their heads. One of their young men at once went up the vine until he came out on the earth plane. He came out on the prairies, on the bank of a river, just where the Mandan village now stands. 1834. He looked all about him. The earth plain was very beautiful. There were many buffaloes there. He killed one with his bow and arrow, and found it was good for food. Then the young man returned to his people under the ground. He told them all he had seen. They held a council, and then they began to climb up the vine to the earth plain. Some of the chiefs and the young warriors and many of the women went up. Then came a very fat woman. The chief said, "Do not go up." But she did, so the vine broke. The Mandans were very sorry about this, because no more could go up. The tribe on the earth plane is not very large, and no one could return to his village in the ground. Therefore the Mandans built their village on the banks of the river, but the rest of the people remained underground. The Flood. Chitimacha. Long, long ago a great storm came. At once the people baked a great earthen pot, and in this 2 of them saved themselves. The pot was held up on the surface of the water. Now 2 rattlesnakes were also saved in the earthen jar, because in the olden days rattlesnakes were the friends of man. In those days, when an Indian left his lodge, the rattlesnake entered it and protected it until he returned. When all the land was flooded, the red-headed woodpecker hooked his claws into the sky and so hung above the waters. But the flood rose so high that part of his tail was wet. You can see the marks even to this day. When the water sank, he was sent to find land. He could find none. Then a dove was sent and came back with a grain of sand. This sand was placed on top of the great waters, and immediately it stretched out. It became dry land. Therefore the dove is called Ground Watcher. The Great Flood, a fragment, Mandan. The earth is a large tortoise. It moves very slowly and carries a great deal of earth on its back. Long ago there was a tribe which is now dead. They used to dig deep down in the earth for badgers. They dug with knives. One day they stuck a knife far down into the earth. It cut through the shell of tortoise. Therefore tortoise at once began to sink into the water. The water rose through the knife cut until it covered all the ground. All the people were drowned except one man. But some of the old people say it was this way. They say there were 4 tortoises, one in the east, one in the west, one in the south, and another in the north. Each tortoise made it rain for 10 days. Therefore the water covered the earth, and all the people were drowned. The Great Flood, Menominee. Manabush wanted to punish the evil Manidos, the Anamaki who had destroyed his brother Wolf. Therefore he invented the ball game. The place selected by Manabush for a ball ground was near a large sandbar on a great lake near Mackinac. He asked the Thunderers to play against the Anamaku. These evil Manadus came out of the ground as bears. One chief was a silvery white bear and the other a gray bear. They played the ball game all day. Manabush watched the game from a tree on a knoll. When the night came, Manabush went to a spot between the places where the bear chiefs had played ball. He said, "I want to be a pine tree cut off halfway between the ground and the top, with 2 strong branches reaching out over the places where the bear chiefs lie down." At once he became such a tree. Now, when the players came to the ball game the next morning, the bear chiefs at once said, "This tree was not standing there yesterday." The Thunderers at once said, "Oh, yes, it was there." Thus they argued. At last one bear chief said, "This tree is Manabush, therefore we will kill him." At once they sent for Grizzly Bear. They said, "Climb this tree, tear off the bark, scratch it." Grizzly Bear did so, and he also bit the branches. Then the bear chiefs called to Serpent. They said, "Ho, Serpent, come climb this tree. Bite it, strangle it in your coils." Serpent at once did so. It was very hard for Manabush, yet he said nothing at all. Then the bear chief said, "No, it is not Manabush, therefore we will finish the game." Now when they were playing, someone carried the ball so far that the bear chiefs were left entirely alone. At once Manabush drew an arrow from his quiver and shot the white bear chief. Then he shot another arrow at Gray Bear Chief. He wounded both of them. Then Manabush became a man again and ran for the sandbar. Soon the underground Anamakwi came back. They saw the 2 bear chiefs were wounded. They immediately called for a flood from the earth to drown Manabush. It came very quickly and followed that one. Then Badger came. He hid Manabush in the earth. As he burrowed, he threw the earth behind him, and that held the water back. So the Anamaktu could not find Manabush. Therefore they gave up the search just as the water began to fill Badger's burrow. So Manabush and Badger returned above ground. Now the underground people carried their chiefs to a wigwam. They said to an old woman, "Take care of them." Then Manabush followed them. He met the old woman. He took her skin and hid himself in it. So he went into the wigwam. He killed both the bear chiefs. Then he took the skins of the bears. When he came out of the wigwam, he shook a network of basswood twigs so that the Anamaktui might know he had been there. At once they pursued him. Water poured out of the earth in many places. A great flood came. Manabush at once ran to the top of the highest mountain. The waters followed him closely. He climbed a great pine tree on the mountain top, but the waters soon reached him. Manabush said to the pine, "Grow twice as high." At once it did so. Yet the waters rose higher. Manabush said again to the tree, "Grow twice as high." He said this 4 times, yet the waters kept rising until they reached his armpits. Then Manabush called to Kisha-Manito for help. The good mystery at once commanded the waters to stop. Manabush looked around. There were only a few animals in the water. He called, "Ho, Otter, come to me and be my brother. Dive down into the water. Bring up some earth that I may make a new world." Otter dived down into the water and was gone a long time. When he appeared again on the surface, Manabush saw he was drowned. Then he called again, "Ho, Mink, come to me and be my brother. Dive down into the water. Bring me some earth." Then Mink dived down into the water. He was gone a long time, and he also was drowned. Manabush looked about him again. He saw Muskrat. He called, "Ho, Muskrat, come to me and be my brother. Dive down into the water. Bring me up earth from below." Muskrat immediately dived into the water. He was gone a very long time. Then, when he came up, Manabush went to him. In his paw was a tiny bit of mud. Then Manabush held Muskrat up and blew on him, so he became alive again. Then Manabush took the earth. He rubbed it between the palms of his hands and threw it out on the water. Thus a new world was made, and trees appeared on it. Manabush told Muskrat that his tribe should always be numerous, and that wherever his people should live, they should have enough to eat. Then Manabush found Badger. To him he gave the skin of the Gray Bear Chief, but he kept for himself the skin of the Silvery White Bear Chief. Origin of Fire, Menominee. While Manabush was still a young man, he said to Nokomis, the earth, "Grandmother, it is cold here and we have no fire. I shall go and get some." Nokomis said, "Oh, no, it is too dangerous." But Manabush said, "Yes, we must have fire." At once Manabush made a canoe of birch bark. Then he became a rabbit. So he started eastward across the great water to a land where lived an old man who had fire. He guarded the fire carefully so that people might not steal it. Now the old man had 2 daughters. One day they came out of the sacred wigwam where the fire was kept. Behold, there was a little rabbit, wet and cold and trembling. They took it up at once in their arms. They carried it into the wigwam. They set it down near the fire. So Manabush sat by the fire while the 2 girls were busy. The old man was asleep. Then Rabbit hopped nearer the fire. When he hopped, the whole earth shook. The old man roused. He said, "My daughters, what has happened?" The girls answered, "Nothing at all. We picked up a little wet rabbit and are letting him dry by the fire." Then again the old man fell asleep. The girls were busy. Suddenly Rabbit seized a stick of burning wood and ran out of the wigwam. He ran with great speed towards his canoe. The old man and the 2 girls followed him closely, but Rabbit reached his canoe and paddled quickly away to the wigwam of Nokomis. He paddled so quickly that the fire stick burned fiercely. Sparks flew from it and burned Rabbit. At once Rabbit and Nokomis gave fire to the Thunderers. They have had the care of fire ever since. The Thunderers and the Origin of Fire, Menominee. When the Great Mystery created the earth, he made also many Manidos. Those of animal form were people of the underground and evil, but the bird Manidos were eagles and hawks. They were the Thunderers. The golden eagle was the thunder which no one could see. Now, when Masha Manido, the good mystery, saw that Bear was still an animal, he permitted him to change his form. Thus Bear became an Indian with light skin. All this happened near Menominee River, near where it empties into Green Bay. At this place also Bear first came out of the ground. Bear found himself alone, so he called to Eagle, "Ho, Eagle, come to me and be my brother." So Eagle came down to earth and became an Indian. While the Thunderers stood there, Beaver came near. Now, as Beaver was a woman, she became a younger brother of the Thunderers. Soon after, as Bear and Eagle stood on a river bank, they saw a stranger, Sturgeon. They called to him. Therefore Sturgeon became Bear's younger brother and his servant. So also Elk was adopted by the Thunderers. He became a younger brother and water carrier. At another time, Bear was going up Wisconsin River and sat down to rest. Out from beneath a waterfall came Wolf. Wolf said, "What are you doing in this place?" Bear said, "I am traveling to the source of the river. I am resting." Just then Crane came flying by. Bear called, "Ho, Crane, carry me to my people at the head of the river. Then will I make you my younger brother." Crane stopped and took Bear on his back. As he was flying off, Wolf called, "Ho, Bear, take me also as your younger brother. I am alone." Bear said, "I will take Wolf as my younger brother." This is how Wolf and Crane became younger brothers of Bear. Wolf afterwards let Dog and Deer join him, having seats in the council. Now Big Thunder lived at Winnebago Lake near Fond du Lac. The Thunderers were all made by Mashamanito to be of benefit to the whole world. When they return from the southwest in the spring, they bring with them the rains which make the earth green, and the plants and trees to grow. If it were not for the Thunderers, the earth would be dry, and all things would perish. Mashamanito gave to the Thunderers squaw corn, which grows on small sticks and has ears of several colors. The Thunderers were also the makers of fire. Mannybush first gave it to them, but he had stolen it from an old man living on an island in the middle of a great lake. Bear and Sturgeon owned rice, which grew abundantly in the waters near Bear's village. One day the Thunderers visited Bear's village and promised to give corn and fire if Bear would give them rice. The Thunderers are the war chiefs and have charge of the lighting of the fire. So Bear gave rice to them. Then he built a long tepee, and a fire was kindled in the center by the Thunderers. From this all the people of the earth received fire. It was carried to them by the Thunderers. When the people travel, the Thunderers go ahead to the camping place and start the fire which is used by all. The origin of fire, Chitimacha. Fire first came from the great being, Kutnakan. He gave it into the care of an Indian so old that he was blind. Now the Indians all knew that fire was good, therefore they tried to steal it. The old man could not see them when they came stealthily to his wigwam, but he could feel the presence of anyone. Then he would beat about him with his stick until he drove away the seekers for fire. Now one day an Indian seized the fire suddenly. At once the watcher of the fire began beating about him with his stick until the thief dropped the fire. But the old man did not know he had dropped it. He still beat about him so fiercely with his stick that he pounded some of the fire into a log. That is why fire is in wood. End of Part 1. Part 2 of Myths and Legends of the Mississippi Valley and the Great Lakes by Catherine Berry Judson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gifts of the Sky God, Chitimacha. Long, long ago, many Indians started to reach the sky world. They walked far to the north until they came to the edge of the sky, where it is fitted down over the earth plane. When they came to this place, they tried to slip through a crack under the edge, but the sky cover came down very tightly and quickly, and crushed all but 6. These 6 had slipped through into the skyland. Then these men began to climb up, walking far over the sky floor. At last they came to the lodge of Kutnakan. They stayed with him as his guests. At last they wished to go back to their own lodges on the earth plane. Kutnakan said, "How will you go down to the earth plane?" One said, "I will go down as a squirrel." So he started to spring down from the skyland. He was dashed to pieces. Kutnakan said to the next, "How will you go down to the earth plane?" And this man also went as an animal, and so the next one also. They were dashed to pieces. Then the others saw that they were crushed by their fall. Therefore the fourth said, I will go down as a spider. And he spun a long line down, which he climbed safely to earth. The fifth said, I will go down as an eagle, and he spread his wings and circled through the air until he alighted on a tree branch. The last one said, I will go down as a pigeon, and so he came softly to earth. Now each one brought back a gift from Kutnaken. The one who came back as a spider had learned how to howl and sing and dance when people were sick. He was the first medicine man. But one Indian had died while these 6 men were up in the skyland. He died before the shaman came down to earth as a spider. Therefore death came among the Indians. Had the shaman come back to earth in time to heal this Indian, there would have been no death. The one who came back as an eagle taught men how to fish, and the pigeon taught the Indians the use of wild maize. Mondamin, Ojibwa. When the springtime came, long, long ago, an Indian boy began his fast according to the customs of his tribe. His father was a very good man, but he was not a good hunter, and often there was no food in the wigwam. So, as the boy wandered from his small tepee in the forest, he thought about these things. He looked at the plants and shrubs and wondered about their uses and whether they were good for food. He thought, I must find out about these things in my vision. One day, as he lay stretched upon his bed of robes in the solitary wigwam, a handsome Indian youth came down from skyland. He was gaily dressed in robes of green and yellow, with the plume of waving feathers in his hands. I am sent to you, said the stranger, by the Great Mystery. He will teach you what you would know. Then he told the boy to rise and wrestle with him. The boy at once did so. At last the visitor said, That is enough. I will come tomorrow. The next day the beautiful stranger came again from the skyland, and again the two wrestled until the stranger said, That is enough. I will come tomorrow. The third day he came again. Again the fasting youth found his strength increased as he wrestled with the visitor. Then that one said, It is enough. You have conquered. He sat himself down in the wigwam. The Great Mystery has granted your wish, he said. Tomorrow when I come, after we have wrestled and you have thrown me down, you must strip off my garments. Clear the earth of roots and weeds and bury my body. Then leave this place, but come often and keep the earth soft and pull up the weeds. Let no grass or weeds grow on my grave. Then he went away, but first he said, Touch no food until after we wrestle tomorrow. The next morning the father brought food to his son. It was the 7th day of fasting, but the boy refused until the evening should come. Again came the handsome youth from the skyland. They wrestled long until he fell to the earth. Then the Indian boy took off the green and yellow robes and buried his friend in soft, fresh earth. Thus the vision had come to him. Then the boy returned to his father's lodge, for his fasting was ended. Yet he remembered the commands of the skyland stranger. Often he visited the grave, keeping it soft and fresh, pulling up weeds and grass. And when people were saying that the summer maker would soon go away and the winter maker come, the boy went with his father to the place where his wigwam had stood in the forest while he fasted. There they found a tall and graceful plant, with bright silky hair and green and yellow robes. "It is Mondamin," said the boy. "It is Mondamin, the corn." Footnote: Then Nokomis, the old woman, spake and said to Minnehaha, "'Tis the moon when leaves are falling. All the wild rice has been gathered, and the maize is ripe and ready. Let us gather in the harvest. Let us wrestle with Mondamin, strip him of his plumes and tassels, of his garments green and yellow." Hiawatha. End footnote. Mondamin, Ottawa. When the Ottawas lived on the Manitoulin Islands in Lake Huron, they had a very strong medicine man. His name was Maswawenini, living statue. Then the Iroquois came and drove the Ottawas away. They fled to Lac Courte Oreille, between Lake Superior and the Mississippi River. But Living Statue remained in the land of his people. He remained to watch the Iroquois, so that his people might know of their plans. His 2 sons stayed with him. At night the medicine man paddled softly around the island in his canoe. He paddled through the water, around the beautiful green island of his people. One morning he rose early to go hunting. His 2 boys were asleep, so Living Statue followed the game trail through the forest. Then he came to a wide green plain. He watched keenly for the enemy of his people, and then he began to cross the plain. When Living Statue was in the middle of the plain, he saw a small man coming towards him. He wore a red plume in his hair. "Where are you going?" asked the Red Plume. "I am hunting," said Living Statue. Red Plume drew out his pipe, and they smoked together. "Where does your strength come from?" asked Red Plume. "I have the strength common to all men," said Living Statue. "We must wrestle," said Red Plume. "If you can make me fall, you will cry, 'I have thrown you Wagamena.'" Now when they had finished smoking, they began to wrestle. They struggled long. Red Plume was small, but his medicine was strong. Living Statue grew weaker and weaker, but at last, by a sudden effort, he threw Red Plume. At once he cried, "I have thrown you Wagamena." Immediately Red Plume vanished. When Living Statue looked at the place where he had fallen, he saw only Mondamin, an ear of corn. It was crooked. There was a red tassel at the top. Someone said, "Take off my robes, pull me in pieces, throw me over the plain, take the spine on which I grow, and throw it in shady places near the edge of the wood. Return after 1 moon. Tell no one." Maswawanini did as the voice directed. Then he returned into the woods. He killed a deer, and so he returned to his wigwam. Now after 1 moon he returned to the plain. Behold, there were blades and spikes of young corn, and from the broken bits of spine grew long pumpkin vines. When summer was gone, Living Statue went again to the plain with his sons. The corn was in full ear. Also the large pumpkin were ripe. Thus the Ottawas received the gift of corn. The Corn Woman, Cherokee. One day a hunter could find no game. He had but a few grains of corn with him. He was very hungry. In the night a dream came to him, and he heard the sound of singing. Early the next morning the hunter rose, but again he found no game. When he slept again, the dream came to him, and again came the sound of singing, but this time it was nearer. Yet again he could find no game. The 3rd night the dream came to the hunter, and when he awoke he still heard the song. Then he rose quickly and followed the song. At last he came to a single green stalk of selju. The stalk spoke to him, and it said, "Take off my roots and take them with you to your wigwam. Tomorrow morning you must chew them before anyone awakes. Then go again into the woods. So will you always be successful in hunting." The green stalk gave him many directions for hunting the elk and the deer. So it talked until the sun rose to the very top of the sky trail. Immediately the green stalk became a woman. She rose gracefully into the air and vanished. Then all the people knew that the hunter had seen Selju, the corn, wife of Kanati. Therefore the hunter was always successful. Discovery of the wild rice, Ojibwa. Long ago Winnebago made his home with his grandmother Nokomis. One day Nokomis said to her grandson, "Prove yourself a man. Take a long journey. Go through the great forest. Fast you. Prepare for the hardships of life." Winnebago took his bow and arrow from his wigwam. He wandered out into the forest. Many days he wandered. Then at last he reached a broad lake, covered thick with heavy-headed stalks. But Winnebago knew not that the grain was food. So Winnebago went back to his grandmother Nokomis. He told her of the broad, quiet lake with the heavy-headed stalks. So Nokomis came, and in their canoe they gathered the wild rice and sowed it in another lake. Again Winnebago left Nokomis. With his bow and arrow he wandered far into the forest. Then some little bushes spoke as he walked. "Sometimes they eat us," they said. Winnebago made no answer. Again the bushes spoke. "Sometimes they eat us." "Who are you talking to?" he asked. "To Winnebago," they said. So he bent down and dug up the bushes by the roots. The roots were long, like an arrow. They were good to eat, but Winnebago had fasted too long. After a while Winnebago wandered on. He was very hungry. Many bushes spoke to him. Many said, "Sometimes they eat us," but he made no answer. One day he followed the river trail when the sun was high. Many little bunches of straw were growing out of the water. They spoke to him, and they said, "Winnebago, sometimes they eat us." So Winnebago picked some of the grains from the heavy-headed stalks and ate. "You are good to eat," he said. "What do they call you?" "They call us Manamin," answered the wild rice. Then Winnebago waded far out into the water. He beat out grains and ate many. They were good for food. Then Winnebago remembered the grain which Nokomis had sown, and he returned to his grandmother and the Manamin Lake. Origin of wild rice, Ojibwa. Now one evening Winnebago returned to his wigwam from hunting. He had found no game. As he came towards his fire, he saw a duck sitting on the edge of a kettle of boiling water, and immediately the duck flew away. Winnebago looked in the kettle. Behold, grains were floating upon the water. Then he ate the broth made with the grains, and it was good. So Winnebago followed the trail of the duck. He came to a lake of Manamin. All the birds and ducks and geese were eating the grain. Therefore Winnebago learned to know Manamin, the wild rice. Origin of Winnebago, Menominee. One day Manabush walked along the lake shore. He was tired and hungry. Then he saw, around a sand spit jutting far out into the water, many waterfowl. Now Manabush had with him only a medicine bag. He hung that on a manabush tree in the brush. He put a roll of bark on his back and returned to the lake shore. He passed slowly by so as not to frighten the birds. Duck and swan suddenly recognized him and swam quickly away from the shore. One of the swans called out, "Ho, Manabush, where are you going?" "I am going to have a dance," said Manabush. "As you may see, I have all my songs with me." Then he called out to all the birds, "Come to me, brothers, let us sing and dance." At once the birds returned to the shore and walked back upon an open space in the grass. Manabush took the bundle of bark from his back. He placed it on the ground, got out his singing sticks, and then he said to the birds, "Now all of you dance around me as I drum. Sing as loudly as you can and keep your eyes closed. The first to look will always have red eyes." So Manabush began to beat time upon his bundle of bark. The birds, with eyes closed, danced around him. Then Manabush began to keep time with one hand as the birds sang loudly. With the other he seized a swan by the neck. Swan gave a loud squawk. "That's right, brothers. Sing as loudly as you can," shouted Manabush. Soon he seized another swan by the neck. Then he seized a goose. At last there were not so many birds singing. Then a tiny duck opened his eyes to see why. At once he shrieked, "Manabush is killing us! Manabush is killing us!" And he started for the water, followed by the rest of the birds. Now this little duck was a poor runner. Manabush quickly caught him and said, "I won't kill you, but you shall always have red eyes, and you shall be the laughingstock of all the birds." And with that Manabush pushed him so hard, yet holding on to his tail, that the duck went far out into the middle of the lake, and his tail came off. Because of that he has red eyes and no tail, even to this day. Then Manabush gathered up the birds he had killed and took them out on the sand spit. He buried them in the sand and built a fire over them to cook them, but he left sticking out the heads of some and the legs of others so he would know where they were. But Manabush was tired. He slapped his thigh and said, "You watch the birds and waken me if anyone comes near them." He stretched out on the sand with his back to the fire and went to sleep. After a while Indians came along in their canoes. They saw the fire and the roasting birds. They went ashore on the sand spit. They pulled out the birds and ate them. But they put back into the sand the heads and feet, just as they had found them, so they departed. Afterwards Manabush awoke very hungry. He pulled at the head of a swan. Behold, the head came out, but there was no bird. He pulled at the feet of a goose. No bird was there. So he tried every head and foot, but the birds were gone. He slapped his thigh again and asked, "Who has been here? Someone has robbed me of my feast. I told you to watch." His thigh answered, "I fell asleep also. I was very tired. See, there are people moving away in their canoes. They are dirty and poorly dressed." Then Manabush ran to the point of the sand spit. He could see the people who were just disappearing around a point. He shouted, "Winnebago! Winnebago!" Therefore the Menominee have always called their thievish neighbors Winnebago. The origin of tobacco. Menominee. One day when Manabush was passing by a high mountain, a fragrant odor came to him from a crevice in the cliffs. He went closer. Then he knew that in the mountain was a giant who was the keeper of the tobacco. He entered the mouth of a cave, going through a long tunnel to the center of the mountain. There in a great wigwam was the giant, and the giant said sternly, "What do you want?" Manabush said, "I want some tobacco." "Come back again in 1 year," said the giant. "The Manitos have just been here for their smoke. They come but once a year." Manabush looked around. He saw a great number of bags filled with tobacco. He seized one and ran out into the open air, and close after him came the giant. Up to the mountain tops fled Manabush, leaping from peak to peak. The giant came close behind him, springing with great bounds. When Manabush reached a very high peak, he suddenly lay flat on the ground, but the giant, leaping, went over him and fell into the chasm beyond. The giant picked himself up and began to climb up the face of the cliff. He almost reached the top, hanging to it by his hands. Manabush seized him and drew him upwards and dropped him down on the ground. He said, "For your meanness you shall become Kakuini, the jumper. You shall become the pest of those who raise tobacco." Thus the giant became a grasshopper. Then Manabush took the tobacco and divided it amongst his brothers, giving to each some of the seed. Therefore the Indians are never without tobacco. Origin of maple sugar. Menominee. One day Manabush returned from the hunt without any food. He could find no game at all, so Nokomis gathered all their robes and the beaded belts and their belongings together. They built a new wigwam among the sugar maple trees. Nokomis said, "Grandson, go into the woods and gather for me pieces of birch bark. I'm going to make sugar." Manabush went into the woods. He gathered strips of birch bark, which he took back to the wigwam. Nokomis had cut tiny strips of the bark to use as thread in sewing the bark into hollow buckets. Then Nokomis went from tree to tree, cutting small holes through the maple bark, so that the sap might flow. She placed a birch bark vessel under each hole. Manabush followed her from tree to tree, looking for the sap to drop. None fell. When Nokomis had finished, Manabush found all the vessels half full. He stuck his finger into the thick syrup. It was sweet. And then he said, "Grandmother, this is all very good, but it will not do. If people make sugar so easily, they will not have to work at all. I will change all this. They must cut wood and keep the sap boiling several nights. Otherwise they will not be busy." So Manabush climbed to the very top of a tree. He showered water all over the maples like rain. Therefore the sugar in the tree dissolved and flows from the tree as thin sap. This is why the uncles of Manabush and their children always have to work hard when they want to make sugar. Manabush and the Moose. Menominee. Manabush killed a moose. He was very hungry, but he was greatly troubled as to how he should eat it. "If I begin at the head," he said, "they will say I ate him head first. But if I begin at the side, they will say I ate him sideways. And if I begin at the tail, they will say I ate him tail first." He was greatly troubled, and while he thus spoke, the wind blew 2 tree branches together. It made a harsh creaking sound. "I cannot eat in this noise," said Manabush, and he climbed the tree. Immediately the branches caught him by the arm and held him. Then a pack of wolves came and ate up the moose. Origin of day and night. Menominee. One day as Wabus, the rabbit, traveled through a forest, he came to a clearing on the bank of the river. There sat Totoba, the Sawat owl. The light was dim, and Rabbit could not see well. He said to Sawat, "Why do you want it so dark? I do not like it. I will cause it to be light." Sawat said, "Do so if you are strong enough. Let us try our powers." So Rabbit and the Owl called a great council of the birds. Some of the birds and animals wanted Rabbit to succeed so that it would be light. Others wanted it to remain dark. Rabbit and Owl began to try their powers. Rabbit began to repeat rapidly, "Wabbin, wabbin, wabbin," light, 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 while Owl kept saying as rapidly as he could, "Unitipa quat, unitipa quat, unitipa quat," night, night, night. If one of them should speak the word of the other, he would lose. So Rabbit kept repeating rapidly, "Wabbin, wabbin, wabbin," while Owl said as rapidly as he could, "Unitipa quat, unitipa quat, unitipa quat," and at last Owl said Rabbit's word, "Wabban." So he lost. Therefore Rabbit decided there should be light, but because some of the animals and birds could hunt only in the dark, he said it should be night part of the time, but all the rest of the time it was day. Origin of the Bear, Cherokee. Long ago, before the white man came, in the land of the Cherokees was a clan called the Anisagulin. One of the boys of the clan used to wander all day long in the mountains. He never ate his food at home. "Why do you do so?" asked his father and mother. The boy did not answer. "Why do you do so?" they asked many days as the boy wandered away into the hills. He did not answer them. Then his mother saw that long brown hair covered his body. They said again, "Where do you go?" They asked, "Why do you not eat at home?" At last the boy said, "There is plenty to eat there. It is better than the corn in the village. Soon I shall stay in the woods all the time." His father and mother said, "No." The boy kept saying, "It is better than here. I am beginning to be different. Soon I shall not want to live here. If you come with me, you will not have to hunt or to plant corn. But first you must fast 7 days." The people began to talk about it. They said, "Often we do not have enough to eat here. There, he says, there is plenty. We will go with him." So they fasted 7 days. Then they left their village and went to the mountains. Now the other tribes had heard what they had talked in their village. At once they sent messengers, but when the messengers met them, they had started towards the mountains, and their hair was long and brown. Their nature was changing. This was because they had fasted 7 days. But the Anisagulin would not go back to their village. They said to the others, "We are going where there is always plenty to eat. Hereafter we shall be called Yana, bears. When you are hungry, come into the woods and call us, and we will give you food to eat." So they taught these messengers how to call them and to hunt them, because even though they may seem to be killed, the Anisagulin live forever. Origin of the word Chicago, Ojibwa. Once an Ottawa hunter and his wife lived on the shores of Lake Michigan. Then the hunter went south, toward the end of the lake, to hunt. When he reached the lake where he had caught beaver the year before, it was still covered with ice. Then he tapped the ice to find the thinner places where the beaver families lived. He broke holes in the weaker points in the ice and went to his wigwam to get his traps. Now the hunter's wife chanced to pass one of these holes, and she saw a beaver on the ice. She caught it by the tail and called to the hunter to come and kill it quickly before it could get back into the water. "No," said the hunter, "if I kill this beaver, the others will become frightened. They will escape from the lake by other openings in the ice." Then the woman became angry, and they quarreled. When the sun was near setting, the hunter went out on the ice again to set more traps. When he returned to his tepee, his wife had gone. He thought she had gone to make a visit. The next morning she had not returned, and he saw her footprints. So he followed her trail to the south. As he followed her trail, he saw that the footprints gradually changed. At last they became the trail of a skunk. The trail ended in a marsh, and many skunks were in that marsh. Then he returned to his people, and they called the place of the skunk. Origin of the word Chicago, Menominee. Footnote: Schoolcraft gives the origin of the word Chicago as follows: Shikog, the animal of the leek or wild onion; Chicago-wunts, the wild leek or polecat plant. Chicago, place of the wild leek. It would really seem, from the myths and the origin of the word, as given above, that the name originated from the great amount of skunk weed on the marshes now covered by the city. And footnote. Potawatomi Indians used to live in the marshes where Chicago now stands. They sent out word to the other tribes that hunting was good. Then the Menominee Indians went to the marshes for game. In the night their dogs barked much, but when the Menominee Indians reached the spot where the dogs barked, they found only skunks. The coming of Manabush, Menominee. When the daughter of Nokomis, the earth, died, Nokomis wrapped her new baby in soft, dry grass. She laid her on the ground under a large wooden bowl. Then she mourned 4 days for her daughter. At the end of 4 days Nokomis heard a sound in her wigwam. It came from the wooden bowl. Then she remembered. She took up the bowl. At once she saw a tiny white rabbit with trembling pink ears. She took it up. She said, "Oh, my dear little rabbit. Oh, my Manabush." She took care of him. One day Rabbit hopped across the wigwam. The earth shook. At once the evil underground spirits, the Anamakwi, said to one another, "What has happened? A great Manitou is born somewhere." Immediately they began to plot against him. In this way Manabush came to earth. He soon grew to be a young man. The story of Manabush, Menominee. The daughter of Nokomis, the earth, is the mother of Manabush, who is also the fire. Flint first grew up out of Nokomis and was alone. Then Flint made a bowl and filled it with earth. Wabus, the rabbit, came from the earth and became a man. Thus was Manabush created. Beneath the earth lived the underground people, the enemies of Manabush. They were the Anamakwi, who annoyed him constantly and sought to destroy him. Now Manabush shaped a piece of flint to make an axe. While he was rubbing it on a rock, he heard the rock make sounds. Kika, 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 kos, 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 kos. He soon understood what the rock was saying, that he was alone on the earth, that he had neither father, mother, brother, nor sister. This is what Flint said while Manabush was rubbing it upon the rock. While he was thinking of this, he heard something coming. It was Makwai, the wolf. He said to Manabush, "Now you have a brother, for I too am alone. We shall live together, and I will hunt for you." Manabush said, "I am glad to see you, my brother. Therefore I shall make you like myself." So he made him a man. Then Manabush and his brother moved away to the shore of a lake, and there built a wigwam. Manabush told his brother of the evil spirits, the underground people, who lived beneath the water. He said, "Never go into the water and never cross on the ice." Now one day Wolf Brother went a-hunting. It was late when he started back. He found himself on the shore of the lake, just opposite the wigwam. He could see it clearly. He did not want to make a long journey around by the lake shore. Therefore he began to cross on the ice. When he reached the middle of the lake, the ice broke. The underground people pulled him under the water, and he was drowned. Now Manabush knew this. He mourned 4 days for Wolf Brother. On the 5th day, while he was following the hunting trail, he saw him approaching. Wolf Brother said, "My fate will be the fate of all our people. They will all die, but after 4 days they will return." Then Manabush saw it was only the shade of his brother. Then he said, "My brother, return to the place of the setting sun. You are now called Nakpot. You will have charge of the dead." The wolf shade said, "If I go there and others follow me, we shall not be able to return when we leave this place." Manabush again spoke. He said, "Go, Nakpot. Prepare a wigwam for others. Build a large fire that they may be guided to it. When they arrive, there must be a wigwam for them." Thus Nakpot left the earth. He lives in the land of the shades, in the country of the setting sun, where the earth is cut off. End of Part 2. Part 3 of Myths and Legends of the Mississippi Valley and the Great Lakes by Catherine Berry Judson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Manabozho and West, Ojibwa. Manabozho lived with his grandmother, Nokomis the Earth, on the edge of a wide prairie. The first sound he heard was that of an owl. He quickly climbed down the tree, and he ran to Nokomis. "Noko," he cried, "I have heard a monito." Nokomis said, "What kind of a noise did it make?" "It said, 'Koho, koho,'" said Manabozho. "Oh, it is only a bird," said Nokomis. One day Manabozho thought, "It is very strange I know so little, and grandmother is so wise. I wonder if I have any father or mother." He went back to the wigwam. He was very silent. "What is the matter?" said Nokomis. Manabozho asked, "Have I no father or mother?" Now his mother had died when he was a very little baby, but Nokomis did not want to tell him. At last she said, "West is your father. He has 3 brothers. They are north, east, and south. They have great power. They travel on mighty wings. Your mother is not alive." Manabozho said, "I will visit my father," but he meant to make war on him because he had learned that his father had not been kind to his mother, and he meant to punish him. Manabozho started on his journey. He traveled very rapidly. He went very far at each step. So at last he met his father, West, on the top of a high mountain. West was glad to see his son. Manabozho pretended to be glad. They talked much. One day the son asked, "What are you most afraid of on earth?" "Well, nothing," said West. Manabozho said, "Oh yes, there must be something." At last West said, "There is a black stone on earth. I am afraid of that. If it should strike me, it would injure me." West said this was a great secret. One day he asked Manabozho, "What are you most afraid of?" "Nothing," was the answer. "Oh yes, there must be something you are afraid of," said West. The son said, "Ee. It is. He seemed afraid to mention it. West said, "Don't be afraid." Then at last his son said, "It is the root of the apuqua, the bulrush." They quarreled because West had not been kind to the mother of Manabozho. Some days later they quarreled. Manabozho said, "I will get some of the black rock." "Oh no, do not do so," cried West. "Oh yes," said his son. West said at once, "I will get some of the apuqua root." "Oh no," cried Manabozho, pretending to be afraid. "Do not, do not." "Oh yes," said West. Manabozho at once went out and brought to his father's wigwam a large piece of black rock. West pulled up and brought in some bulrush roots. Manabozho threw the black rock at West. It broke in pieces. Therefore you may see pieces lying around even to this day. West struck his son with the bulrush root. Thus they fought. But at last Manabozho drove West far over the plains to the darkening land. So West came to the edge of the world where the earth is broken off short. Then he cried, "Stop, my son. I am immortal, therefore I cannot be killed. I will remain here on the edge of the earth plain. You must go about doing good. You must kill monsters and serpents and all evil things. All the kingdoms of the earth are divided, but at the last you may sit with my brother North." Footnote: Back retreated Mujaquyas, rushing westward o'er the mountains, stumbling westward down the mountains, 3 whole days retreated fighting, still pursued by Hiawatha, to the doorways of the west wind, to the portals of the sunset. "Hold!" at length cried Mujaquyas. "Hold, my son, my Hiawatha. 'Tis impossible to kill me, for you cannot kill the immortal." Hiawatha. End footnote. Thus Manabozho became the Northwest Wind. Manabush and the Great Fish, Menominee. After his brother Wolf had died, Manabush looked about him. He found he was no longer alone on earth. There were many other people, the children of Nokomis. They were his aunts and uncles. The evil Manitos annoyed the people very much. Therefore Manabush wished to destroy them. Therefore he went to the shores of the lake where they lived. He called to the waters to disappear. 4 times he called out. At once the waters vanished. There lay the Anamaqui. They lay on the mud in the bottom of the lake. They looked like fishes. The chief lay near the shore. He was very large. Manabush said to Great Fish, "I shall destroy you because you will not allow my people to come near the shore." So he went towards the Great Fish. But the smaller Manitos caused the waters to return. Thus they all escaped. Then Manabush went into the woods. He made a canoe of birch bark. He wanted to destroy Great Fish in the water. As he left the shore in his canoe, he began to sing, "Great Fish, come and swallow me." Only the young fish came near. Manabush said scornfully, "I do not wish you. I want your chief to come and swallow me." Great Fish was much annoyed. He darted forward and swallowed Manabush and his canoe. Thus Manabush found himself in the Great Fish. He looked around him. Many of his people were there. Bear and deer, porcupine and raven, buffalo, pine tree squirrel, and many others. Manabush said to Buffalo, "My uncle, how did you get here? I never saw you near the water, but always on the prairie." Buffalo said, "I came near the lake to get some fresh green grass. Great Fish caught me." And thus said all the animals. They said, "We came near the lake and Great Fish swallowed us." Then Manabush said, "We will now have to go to the shore of Nokomis, my grandmother. You will all have to help me." At once they all began to dance around inside of Great Fish. Therefore he began to swim quickly towards shore. Manabush began to cut a hole over his head so they could get out when Great Fish reached the shore of Nokomis, the earth. They sang a magic song. They sang, "I see the sky, I see the sky." Pine Squirrel had a curious voice. He hopped about singing, "Sek, sek, sek, sek." This was very amusing to the other people. Great Fish thought, "I ought not to have swallowed that man. I must swim to the shore where Nokomis lives." So he swam quickly until he reached the beach. Then Manabush cut a larger hole. Thus they all climbed out of Great Fish. The birds helped Manabush. They stood on the sides of Great Fish and picked the flesh from his bones. Footnote: And again the sturgeon Nama heard the shout of Hiawatha, heard his challenge of defiance, the unnecessary tumult ringing far across the water. In his wrath he darted upward, flashing, leaped into the sunshine, opened his great jaws and swallowed both canoe and Hiawatha. Hiawatha. End footnote. The departure of Manabush, Menominee. Now Manabush was going away. He went to Mackinac. When he reached there, he made a high, narrow rock, and this he leaned against the cliff. This rock is as high as an arrow can be shot from a bow. At this place he was seen by his people for the last time. Before he went, he talked with them. Manabush said, "I am going away now. I have been badly treated by other people who live in the land about you. I shall go across a great water towards the rising sun, where there is a land of rocks. There I shall set up my wigwam. When you hold a Mita-woko-nik and are all together, you shall think of me. When you speak my name, I shall hear you. Whatever you ask, that I will do." Then Manabush spoke no more to his people. He entered the canoe. Then he went slowly over the great water to the land of rocks. He vanished from his people as he went towards the rising sun. Footnote: The Ojibwas say he went toward the setting sun. Thus departed Hiawatha, Hiawatha the Beloved, in the glory of the sunset, in the purple mists of evening, to the regions of the home wind of the northwest wind, Hiawatha. Hiawatha. End footnote. The return of Manabush, Menominee. The uncles of Manabush, the people, used to visit a rock near Mackinac, where the old men said Manabush was living. They built a long lodge there. They sang in their Mita-weko-nik there. Manabush heard them. Sometimes he came to them. He appeared as a little white rabbit, trembling, with pink ears, just as he had first appeared to Nokomis, his grandmother. The request for immortality, Menominee. One day, long after Manabush had gone away from his people, an Indian dreamed that he spoke to him. At daylight he sought 7 friends, chief men of the Mittawit. They held a council together, and then rose and went in search of Manabush. The dreamer blackened his face. On the shore of the great waters they entered canoes and paddled toward a rocky place in the land of the rising sun. Very long they paddled over the water until they reached the land where dwelt Manabush. Soon they reached his wigwam. Manabush bade them enter. The door of the wigwam lifted and fell again as each one entered. When all were seated, Manabush said, "My friends, why is it you have come so long a journey to see me? What is it you wish?" All but one answered at once, "Manabush, we wish some hunting medicine. Thus we may supply our people with much food." "You shall have it," said Manabush. Then he turned to the silent one. He asked, "What do you wish?" The Indian replied, "I wish no hunting medicine. I wish to live forever." Manabush rose and went towards the Indian. He took him by the shoulders and carried him to his sleeping place. He set him down and said, "You shall be a stone. Thus you shall be everlasting." Immediately the other Indians arose and went down to the shore. In their canoes they returned to their own land. It is from these 7 who returned that we know of the abode of Manabush. Peboan and Sigwan, Ojibwa. Long ago an old man sat alone in his lodge beside a frozen stream. The fire was dying out, and it was near the end of winter. Outside the lodge the cold wind swept before it the drifting snow. So the old man sat alone, day after day, until at last a young warrior entered his lodge. He was fresh and joyous and youthful. The old man welcomed him. He drew out his long pipe and filled it with tobacco. He lighted it from the dying embers of the fire. Then they smoked together. The old man said, "I blow my breath and the streams stand still. The water becomes stiff and hard like the stones." "I breathe," said the warrior, "and flowers spring up over the plain." "I shake my locks," said the old man, "and snow covers the land. Leaves fall from the trees. The birds fly away. The animals hide. The earth becomes hard." "I shake my locks," said the young man, "and the warm rain falls. Plants blossom. The birds return. The streams flow." Then the sun came up over the edge of the earth plain and began to climb the trail through the skyland. The old man slept. Behold, the frozen stream near by began to flow. The fire in the lodge died out. Robins sat upon the lodge poles and sang. Then the warrior looked upon the sleeping old man. Behold, it was Peboan, the winter maker. Footnote: In his lodge beside a river, close beside a frozen river, sat an old man sad and lonely. White his hair was as a snowdrift, dull and low his fire was burning, and the old man shook and trembled. Hearing nothing but the tempest as it roared along the forest, seeing nothing but the snowstorm as it whirled and hissed and drifted, all the coals were white with ashes, and the fire was slowly dying, as a young man walking lightly at the open doorway entered. Red with blood of youth his cheeks were, soft his eyes as stars in springtime. Hiawatha. End footnote. The Grave Fires, Ojibwa. A small war party of Ojibwas fought long ago with Indians on an open plain. Then their chief was shot by an arrow in his breast as he rode after the retreating enemy. When his warriors found their chief dead, they placed him, sitting with his back against a tree. They left him there with his bow and arrows. But the chief was not dead. He saw the warriors leave him, and he ran after them as they rode the homeward trail. He followed closely in their trail. He slept in their camp, yet they did not see him. When the war party reached their own village, they sang the song of victory, yet they sent up the death wail for those who were killed. The women and children came out. The chief heard his warriors tell of his death. He said, "No, I am not dead." But they did not hear him. Then the chief went to his own wigwam. His wife was weeping and wailing for his death. "I am here," he said, but she did not hear him. "I am hungry," he said. She made no answer. Only she raised again the death wail. Then the chief thought, perhaps only his spirit had returned. Perhaps his body was yet on the field of battle. So he followed the trail back to the battlefield. It was a 4 days' journey. For 3 days he saw no one as he journeyed. The 4th day, on the edge of the plain, he saw a fire in his trail. He walked to one side and the other. The fire moved also, and always burned before him. Then he turned in another direction. The fire was again in his trail. Then he sprang suddenly and jumped through the flame. At once he awoke. He was sitting on the ground with his back against a tree. Over his head on the branches sat a large war eagle. Now Eagle was his guardian, because he had come to him in his fasting vision in his youth. Then the wounded chief arose. He followed the trail of the war party to his village. 4 days he followed the homeward trail. He came to a stream which flowed between him and his wigwam. Therefore he gave the whoop which means the return of an absent friend. Then the Indians began to think. They said, "No one is absent. Perhaps it is an enemy." So they sent over a canoe with armed men. Thus the chief landed among his own people. Then the chief gave them instructions. He said it was pleasing to a spirit to have a fire burning at the grave for 4 days after the body was buried. This was because it is 4 days' journey on the death trail to the ghost land. So the spirit needed a fire at his camping place every evening. Also, he said the spirit needed his bow and arrow, his best robes, in his journey. Therefore the Ojibwa burn a fire 4 nights at a new grave, that the spirit may be happy in following the trail of the dead to the spirit land. Footnote: Thus they buried Minnehaha, and at night a fire was lighted. On her grave 4 times was kindled, for her soul upon its journey to the islands of the blessed. From his doorway Hiawatha saw it burning in the forest, lighting up the gloomy hemlocks, from his sleepless bed uprising. From the bed of Minnehaha stood and watched it at the doorway, that it might not be extinguished, might not leave her in the darkness. Hiawatha. End footnote. The Death Trail, Choctaw. After a man dies, he must travel far on the death trail. It journeys to the darkening land, where sun slips over the edge of the earth plane. Then the spirit comes to a deep, rapid stream. There are steep and rugged hills on each side, so that one may not follow a land trail. The trail of the dead leads over the stream, and the only bridge is a pine log. It is a very slippery log, and even the bark has been peeled off. Also on the other side of the bridge are 6 persons. They have rocks in their hands and throw them at spirits when they are just at the middle of the log. Now, when an evil spirit sees the stones coming, he tries to dodge them. Therefore he slips off the log. He falls far into the water below, where are evil things. The water carries him around and around, as in a whirlpool, and then brings him back again among the evil things. Sometimes evil spirit climbs up on the rocks and looks over the country of the good spirits, but he cannot go there. Now the good spirit walks over safely. He does not mind the stones and does not dodge them. He crosses the stream and goes to a good hunting land. It is more beautiful there than on the earth plane. There are no storms. The sky is always blue, and the grass is green, and there are many buffaloes. Therefore there is always feasting and dancing. The Duck and the Northwest Wind, Ojibwa. Once Shingebis, the duck, lived all alone in his wigwam on the shore of a lake. It was winter and very cold. Ice had frozen over the top of the water. Shingebis had but 4 logs of wood in his wigwam, but each log would burn 1 month, and there were but 4 winter months. Footnote: And at night Kabibonaka to the lodge came, wild and wailing, heaped the snow in drifts about it, shouted down into the smoke flue, shook the lodge poles in his fury, flapped the curtain of the doorway. Shingebis the diver feared not, Shingebis the diver cared not. 4 great logs had he for firewood, 1 for each moon of the winter, and for food the fishes served him. By his blazing fire he sat there, warm and merry, eating, laughing, singing, "O Kabibonaka, you are but my fellow mortal." Hiawatha. End footnote. Shingebis had no fear of the cold. He would go out on the coldest day. He would seek for places where rushes and flags grew through the ice. He pulled them up and dived through the broken ice for fish. Thus he had plenty of food. Thus he went to his wigwam, dragging long strings of fish behind him on the ice. Northwest noticed this. He said, "Shingebis is a strange man. I will see if I cannot get the better of him." Northwest shook his rattle, and the wind blew colder. Snow drifted high, but Shingebis did not let his fire go out. In the worst storms he continued going out, seeking for the weak places in the ice where the roots grew. Northwest noticed this. He said, "Shingebis is a strange man. I will go and visit him." That night Northwest went to the door of the wigwam. Shingebis had cooked his fish and eaten it. He was lying on his side before the fire, singing songs. He sang, "Kanish, kanish, bien, bien, bonin, bonin, oki, oki, kawaya, kawaya." This meant, "Spirit of Northwest, you are but my fellow man." Now he sang this because he knew Northwest was standing at the door of his wigwam. He could feel his cold breath. He kept right on singing his songs. Northwest said, "Shingebis is a strange man. I shall go inside." Therefore Northwest entered the wigwam and sat down on the opposite side of the lodge. Shingebis lay before the fire and sang, "Spirit of Northwest, you are but my fellow man." Then he got up and poked the fire. The wigwam became very warm. At last Northwest said, "I cannot stand this. I must go out. Shingebis is a very strange man." So he went out. Then Northwest shook his rattles until the great storms came. Thus there was much ice and snow and wind. All the flag roots were frozen in hard ice. Still Shingebis went fishing. He bit off the frozen flags and rushes and broke the hard ice around their roots. He dived for fish and went home, dragging strings of fish behind him on the ice. Northwest noticed this. He said, "Shingebis must have very strong medicine. Some manito is helping him. I cannot conquer him. Shingebis is a very strange man." So he let him alone. How the Hunter Destroyed Snow. Menominee. Once a hunter with his wife and 2 children lived in a tepee. Each day the hunter went out for game. He was a good hunter, and he brought back much game. But one day, after autumn had gone and winter had come, the hunter met Kon, Snow, who froze his feet badly. Then the hunter made a large wooden bowl and filled it with Kon. He buried it in a deep hole where the midday sun could shine down upon it and where Snow could not run away. Then he covered the hole with sticks and leaves so that Snow would be a prisoner until summer. Now when midsummer came and everything was warm, the hunter came back to this hole and pulled away the sticks and leaves. He let the midday sun shine down upon Kon so that he melted. Thus the hunter punished Kon. But when autumn came again, one day the hunter heard someone say to him when he was in the forest, "You punished me last summer, but when winter comes, I will show you how strong I am." The hunter knew it was Kon's voice. He at once built another tepee near the one in which he lived and filled it full of firewood. At last winter came. When the hunter was in the forest one day, he heard Kon say, "Now I am coming to visit you as I said I should. In 4 days I shall be at your tepee." When the hunter returned home, he made ready more firewood. He built a fire at the 2 sides of the tepee. After 4 days everything became frozen. It was very cold. The hunter kept up the fires in the tepee. He took out all the extra fur robes to cover his wife and children. The cold became more severe. It was hard not to freeze. On the 5th day, towards night, the hunter looked out from his tepee upon a frozen world. Then he saw a stranger coming. He looked like any other stranger, except that he had a very large head and an immense beard. When he came to the tepee, the hunter asked him in. He at once came in, but he would not go near either of the fires. This puzzled the hunter, and he began to watch the stranger. It became colder and colder after the stranger had come into the tepee. The hunter added more wood to each of the fires until they roared. The stranger seemed too warm. The hunter added more wood, and the stranger became warmer and warmer. Then the hunter saw that as he became warm, he seemed to shrink. At last his head and body were quite small. Then the hunter knew who the stranger guest was. It was Kon, the cold. So he kept up his fires until Kon melted altogether away. The Pipe of Peace, Ojibwa. In the olden days, so they say, the Indians fought much. Always they followed the war trail. Then Chitimacha, the Great Mystery, thought, "This is not well. My children should not always follow the war trail." Therefore he called a great council. He called all the tribes together. Now this was on the upper Mississippi. Chitimacha stood on a great wall of red rock. On the green plain below him were the wigwams of his children. All the tribes were there. Chitimacha broke off a piece of the red rock. He made a pipe out of it. He made a pipe by turning it in his hands. Then he smoked the pipe, and the smoke made a great cloud in the sky. He spoke in a loud voice. He said, "See, my people, this stone is red. It is red because it is the flesh of all tribes. Therefore can it be used only for a pipe of peace when you cease to follow the war trail. Therefore it is the place of peace. To all the tribes it belongs." Then the cloud grew larger, and Chitimacha vanished in it. Now, therefore, because of the command of Chitimacha, the Indians smoke the pipe of peace when they cease to follow the war trail, and because it is the place of peace, the tomahawk and the scalping knife are never lifted there. Footnote: On the mountains of the prairie, on the great red pipestone quarry, Chitimacha the mighty, he the master of life descending, on the red crags of the quarry, stood erect and called the nations, called the tribes of men together. I am weary of your quarrels, weary of your wars and bloodshed, weary of your prayers for vengeance, of your wranglings and dissensions. Break the red stone from this quarry, mold and make it into peace pipes. Take the reeds that grow beside you, deck them with your brightest feathers, smoke the calumet together. Hiawatha. Endnote. The Thunder's Nest, Ojibwa. Thunder had a nest where a very small bird sits upon her eggs during fair weather. When an egg hatches, the skies are rent with bolts of thunder. End of Part 3.